because we used to go out with the kids and pick up these, these milk buckets full of, or water buckets, same difference, full of persimmons, and they're more seed than they are pulp. And we would spend hours and hours with a colander doing this, and maybe wind up with 6 quarts, maybe.
Oh no, pints.
Pints. Yeah, 6 pints.
So,
but we would work all day. I mean, like 12, 14 hours for these few pints of persimmon pulp.
They're hard to come by.
Yes, and so now I can buy it for $3 or $4 a pint. Somebody's already.
I'll stand there and.
No, right. Oh, my arm would hurt. I do this one. And of course, the kids weren't that old, but here you can do it a while. And of course, kids, a few minutes is about their
and they had persimmon from one end to the.
Yeah, but while so she'd go to work, we would do this.
Aunt Ethel would send me out to a persimmon tree down there by the creek.
Okay.
I'm not sure what direction it was, but kind of uphill there from where you came in. And I'd get some, and she'd make a persimmon pudding. And then that reminds me of going uphill. I'm sure you've attended church.
Island Chapel?
Yeah.
Yes.
And there'd be musicians come through with have a revival, so we'd go up there. That was kind of neat.
Yeah, we not every Sunday would go. Sometimes Irene and I would go to Sunday school by herself up there, and then sometimes Grandma and us would go up there for Sunday night service. Well, the problem was there's no light, and it was difficult to walk because it wasn't a nice.
Right, it was steep hill too.
Steep hill, gravel, and we had copperheads and rattlesnakes, and but anyway, we would go up there at times, and but I know when particularly it was Maggie. Was it Maggie? Was her name? Lived up the holler, and she would get the spirit. There was several different people get the spirit, but she's the one that yelled the longest and the loudest, and we could always tell her voice. And when she started shouting, but anyway, as we sat down in the holler, do you remember this? And you hear the bell ringing for service, and you could hear them singing, and you could tell they were preaching because they get kind of loud, but I couldn't necessarily understand the words, but we could tell a service was going on. So we kind of went to church every Sunday, whether we were there on the hill or not. Red Nelson was the preacher.
I don't remember who was preaching or anything. I do remember the music and going up there.
Well, I would whistle during service. When they would sing, I'd whistle. So they finally brought me aside and said, "You don't whistle during service." I said, "Why not? You got a piano going and it's music, and they would ask me not to, so I had to quit whistling in church.
So between the vegetables, or especially now the beans, how they mature towards the end of the season, and you have a mixture of green beans along with shelled beans. There would always, I don't know how they got in there, there'd always be some rocks that was just about the size of a bean. And you didn't chew real hard. You kind of came down lightly to figure out what was in your mouth.
Right.
And of course, everybody did their own food supply. So in the fall, there'd be some hogs to butcher.
Yes, the hogs that you had raised yourself.
Yeah. So we went through that. I remember down at Vinzan's with Grandpa Mccracken, my Grandpa Mccracken. He had a smokehouse, and that was the best smelling thing you ever went in.
Yes, yes.
Those hams would be hanging in there. There'd been sugar cured, sugar and salt cured.
And smoked.
And smoked. I know it was a thick wall thing. I'm not sure it was logs or not, but it was an old smokehouse. And of course we enjoyed that.
Times were slower then, weren't they?
A lot slower. I remember Grandpa Mccracken going in with, I suppose, my dad to have that 35 Ford serviced, and he was real interested in the guy greasing it. You're not supposed to be there. They had it up on a rack, Well, he had his nose right up in there. Well, the thing slipped off of his shirt and shot grease all over him. So he got out of there. Another thing he would do, we'd go down by the creek and pick a lot of blackberries.
Yes.
And we got $1 a gallon for them in Vincennes.
Well, that's a lot of money, really.
It was a lot of money.
Did you get anything else besides blackberries as a result? As a bonus? Like chiggers?
Oh yeah, plenty of chiggers, and it'd usually be a racer snake of some kind running around down in there.
Yes.
So we had to contend with those. But we'd get our blackberries, go down to the highway, and thumb a ride into Vincennes.
Which was how far?
What do you think, Karen? We just drove it,
About
10 miles at the most.
no more like that.
Which was back then was quite a trip.
But somebody'd pick us up and take us into Vincennes. And we'd go from door to door with a few buckets of blackberries and get them sold. And then we'd go promptly down to the bar down by the Wabash River, which I think most of the money for the strawberries would be spent.
Blackberries?
Blackberries.
Easing the chigger bites?
Yeah. I don't know what I did while he was in there playing cards and getting a drink, but I'd do something around there until, and that old bar was still there the last time that I looked, which had been back several years ago now, but it was still down there, but they turned it into a restaurant.
Okay.
Right down on the river.
Tell what your dad said about William Francis, how he rode a horse.
Oh yeah, you've probably heard that story.
No.
William Francis, I guess they had secured a certain amount of prestige in that small community with the number of children they had, and they had homesteaded or ever how they came by that land. Cut a lot of timber. Of course, that's about all it was good for, was cutting timber, and they'd float them down the river to market to get rid of the logs. His name was apparently pretty good in the community because he rode his horse into a bar one day, and he owed them some money, and they were demanding it, and so he wrote out a check on a corn shop. And the bank accepted it.
Well, I'll be.
Paid the bill. So I heard that about.
Then he rode the horse into the bar.
He rode it in, opened the doors and rode it into the bar and paid the bill.
That is Francis Mccracken?
Yeah.
Father of the 10.
I remember that little story. How true it was, I don't know.
Your dad told it.
Grandpa John Mccracken was a stonemason over at West Baden when they built that hotel.
At West Baden?
At West Baden.
The big one they've just remodeled. Did you get to see that?
No.
Beautiful.
The bridge was
We saw
closed.
part of it, but there was road construction or
Okay.
something. Anyway, he worked over there. That was one of his jobs that he did. And he went into Kentucky and recruited black labor and brought them back up into Indiana and worked them. And then it would come payday, and he was talking about how flighty some of them were. They'd pay them out and they'd have bills in their hand and some change. And one of them would goose the other one, and the money would go flying into the river. So they thought that was funny. I don't know why they thought it was funny, but anyway. And they housed the black workers down by some creek or river there.
Tents, I assume.
Yeah, in tents or something like that.
You know there is Mccracken County, Kentucky on the Ohio River.
Right.
I wonder if that's where he went back.
Don't know. I do not know. I'm talking about Mccracken name. There's a Mccracken range of mountains in western Arizona and a Mccracken mine.
Didn't know that.
And I don't know if there's any connection at all. Our son, Kelly Mccracken, found that, and I've got a map of that range of mountains and where that's at. It's not an active mine now. It was active maybe up until 1930s or something like that. So somebody by the name of Mccracken worked that end of the country down there.
In the 1880s, the auditor here in Morgan County was Mccracken. The reason you know that, the auditor, recorder, he had several different elected positions. They would sign their name as an official on a lot of the recorded documents. And we have the creek here in Morgan County, Mccracken Creek. I don't know when they came into Morgan County, but I assume probably about the time they hit Bend Sands. But
I suppose. I think somebody told me that the major routes of immigration were either through the Carolinas
yes.
or New Orleans, Louisiana.
Well, there was another route. The northern route went from the Pennsylvania, Ohio, northern Indiana, on to Illinois, Iowa.
Okay.
Then you had the Ohio River down that, it's going to New Orleans, and the other route was in from the Carolinas, like you're talking about, up through Kentucky, be part of Tennessee, Kentucky, northern. That's lots of the Irish came through there.
So there were remnants of the Mccracken name in the Delta of Mississippi, even from that immigration out of the South.
No, I didn't know that.
But as far as I know, there's no relation to our clan. Can you think of anything else?
I can't think of
Well,
it.
maybe you can have her talk about her family.
Oh, no.
Well, about you mentioned about shooting a rifle. I knew as a kid when I grew up, people would come back for the weekend because they lived in the cities and not good at living.
Couldn't shoot anywhere.
No, and that was a big deal. They go in, they got to pool their money to get a box of shells, go in town. And now we just go buy a box of shells. Then it was a big deal to go buy a box of shells. And they put targets up, like you're talking. And out of the distance there, when we'd shoot from the house out to a different post, they put things on posts, and sometimes all the way out to the creek. And it was a big deal for the guys to sit around
And fire at those
and see who's
tin cans or what we could find to put up.
right, who's the best shot. Being a good shot was very important back when I was a kid. Doesn't have the importance today as it did
No.
then, and that I think that it's not a legend, but that heritage of ours is why gun control now is a big issue in the country, and it's lost its true meaning.
Yeah.
Because like you talk about, your grandparents had the holes in the log cabin so they could shoot at the Indians because it was still a wilderness. And then you had to hunt to put food on the table, meat,
And you needed accuracy.
and you needed accuracy. And we don't need a gun now for any of those purposes. But back then it was important. The man and his gun was important.
Yep. That was something we learned to do. And when we went through ROTC or officers training, well, the guys from the country could outshoot anybody else.
Mm-hmm.
Now, wasn't William Francis an orphan?
Well, yes. So I understand that he was
He had a brother.
orphaned, and there was several in that family, but due to the plague or something that took some of the lives of people, then the homestead, wherever they had in those years, they burnt everything if there was a disease such as that.
Oh, okay.
So all the records, any records that were available at that time of the family's immigration into Indiana was lost. There were some girls in the family, and of course, we don't know, I don't know who they are. Maybe Bob knows or somebody has researched it.
I think he traced some of them back to Mccracken County, Kentucky. But Francis came from where? Do you know where he came from?
Not really.
But we
No.
heard he was an orphan, wasn't it?
Yeah, that he was orphaned.
His family was killed or died